What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths #2. Now, what this initially does is this opens up with Pariah's story, right? This idea of Pariah sitting down and kind of explaining to a degree how things turned out the way that they were. Now, his story is a little murky. Fortunately, I'm here to clear it all up. So one thing to remember is that Pariah was not originally one of DC's most powerful beings in existence. He is now, right? But he wasn't originally. The way things played out with Pariah originally in DC Comics is that he was just a guy in an alternate reality who was a scientific genius, and he wanted to witness the beginnings of all of creation, right? The creation of the universe. But when he did that, he unwittingly essentially released the Anti-Monitor and the original Crisis on Infinite Earths story. And that basically led to him going forward and having to witness the Anti-Monitor as he wiped out universe after universe in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, following that event, it was really kind of his penance. He was just kind of a character who existed. He did a few things here and there, nothing of any major significance. But the reality is, during this event, or at least the events leading up to it, somehow or another, which has not been fully explained yet, he ended up coming into contact with the Great Darkness. Now, one of the things that we've covered here, and it was explicitly in the tie-in with Swamp Thing, we initially looked at the Great Darkness as some kind of a being that was hell-bent on conquering everything, right? Like an evil entity, that sort of a thing. But that's not really the case, right? It doesn't really care about good and evil. It's one of those entities where it's actually being used by Pariah for his own ends. And of course, we'll figure that out as time goes on in this story. But being empowered by the Great Darkness, and it's one of the things that we'd established before, he's basically more powerful than anybody who's out there at the moment, which really includes beings like the Spectre. And that's something that I did want to clarify. In DC's hierarchy, the Spectre is basically near the top. So what you're talking about here is somebody comparable to like the Beyonders from Marvel Comics in terms of like where he resides as far as the hierarchy goes, right? Maybe Lucifer Morningstar, somebody like that, might be more powerful than him, but even then, it's kind of hard to tell, and we're not entirely sure. The reality is, again, what Pariah has been doing is going around and snatching up different heroes and then throwing them into Paradise Worlds. And again, we'll find out more about how that works. But what we end up doing here is basically switching over to the Teen Titans, or the Titans itself. And this really focuses on like the fall of the Titans, right? The death of the Titans in DC Comics. And it's really, really cool because what you end up getting is basically Slade Wilson Deathstroke launching an attack against the superhero community. So it is quite literally Deathstroke versus the DC universe. Now, the cool thing about this, and this is one of the things to bear in mind, Deathstroke has really just kind of brought together his own superhero team. It's really the newest iteration of the Secret Society. So basically a coming together of the different villains across the DC landscape. But when this happens, and what makes this so awesome is Deathstroke is a guy who could pull it off. One of the things that goes on, if you're not overly familiar with, DC Comics in general, Deathstroke is a guy who's easily slept on, right? He's a guy who's slept on big time. People don't really realize how capable this guy is. Being able to organize the villain community and launching attack against the superhero community in the absence of the Justice League, it's basically him utilizing the best of his capabilities. Espionage, subterfuge, all those different things. And so taking out the Titans themselves was really child's play for Deathstroke in a lot of ways. But ultimately, his grand prize, the person he really wants here, is Nightwing more than anything else. And it's really more of a ceremonial thing, because one of the things that he establishes here is that, again, as we've talked about in previous videos, when it comes to the Justice League, Superman's kind of the guy who's above all others, right? Everybody sort of idolizes Superman and they look to him as like the leader of the superhero community. But on a ground level, right, the attainable goal of what it means to be a good guy, Nightwing's the champion, right? He's the one at the very top of the list. And so the result of this is that you have Deathstroke in a position to where he could take out Nightwing. And what it would do is it wouldn't simply just be him killing Nightwing, right? That's not really what he wants to do. Instead, he wants to face off against him one-on-one and see who comes out on top, so that when he defeats Nightwing, there won't be any question. It won't be due to a cheap shot or anything like that. But killing Dick Grayson would basically create a kind of rift in the superhero community where it would demoralize them in a way they wouldn't simply be able to come back from by any discernible means. And so what you get is is a knockdown, drag out fight between the two. Now, one of the things to remember, and this is something that I feel like a lot of people tend to forget, when it comes to Dick Grayson, yes, he was trained by Batman, but he was trained by a lot of other people as well. And he's been trained by different organizations. So to face off against Dick Grayson is to almost face off against Batman, just because Batman has trained with so many people and so many groups and in so many different martial arts styles and so on. And so ultimately Dick Grayson gets the momentary upper hand on Deathstroke, right? He wins the first round. Now, of course, at that point, the Secret Society is like, do that again, Nightwing, and then we'll kill you. Your normal villain stuff, right? Your small time villain stuff, that kind of a thing. But the response of Deathstroke is no, right? This is a legit fight between myself and Nightwing, one-on-one. And so what Deathstroke says is, okay, you won the first round. Now we have somebody else fight in your stead, right? It's a rotating kind of thing. And so where Nightwing realizes that his Titans Academy, right? Basically this kind of school that he's running, this team that he's building, because they're not ready to face off against someone like Deathstroke because of how capable he is, he comes to this realization, if he were to send virtually any one of them out there, they would probably die. They'd probably be killed by Deathstroke. Even somebody like Raven, right? Like this is a one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat. It's not using magic or mysticism or anything like that. So even somebody like Raven, despite all of her vaunted abilities and as powerful as she is, in a hand-to-hand fight, she would get absolutely crushed. And so Nightwing realizes no one can go against Deathstroke and survive. And so he asks the question, if you kill me, then that basically means the day's saved, right? You let everybody else go because I'm your target. And the response of Deathstroke is yes. And so Nightwing's just kind of like, then let's get this over with, right? And literally just leaves himself vulnerable to be killed by Deathstroke, who launches the killing blow, only for Jonathan Kent to step in and save the day. Now, this is one of the coolest things, and I gotta say, I love the way this panel looks. Holy cow. As soon as I saw this, I was just like, wow, dude, this looks so amazing. But that's literally what it is, right? Like Jonathan Kent, right? The son of Superman steps in and blocks the attack. And when that happens, you kind of have, okay, Nightwing and Jonathan Kent teaming up. Now, the reality here is that Jonathan Kent's efforts can be better served because of his super speed, his enhanced strength. It can be better served taking out the other members of the Secret Society and then freeing the other members of the Titans, right? Like the team that Nightwing's basically building. And so once that's done and out of the way, Deathstroke immediately responds and is like, okay, you were a fool if you didn't think that I expected the arrival of the son of Superman somewhere along the line, because he would, right? Deathstroke would expect that. It's not just caveat writing. It's not a hand-wavy explanation for this. Deathstroke would legitimately be expecting that, right? Like he would be waiting on that. And that's why he's got somebody in reserve of his own. Enter Hank Henshaw, also known as Cyborg Superman, literally steps up. And at that point, Deathstroke's like, get him, right? So like literally Cyborg Superman races after Jonathan Kent. Now, here's the funny thing about this. When it comes to Cyborg Superman, for those of you guys who don't know the idea behind him, this guy's OG double OG. So the whole thing behind it is like Hank Henshaw was his own character somewhere along the line. He did his own stuff, whatever, but he basically ended up being merged with Cyborg technology. The reality here is, following the death of Superman, Cyborg was kind of rewritten by DC Comics in one of the least great moments in their publication history as being a guy who was trying to be a replacement Superman. He didn't always look like this, and at one point his body was covered in flesh and blood, and he did really, it really was believed that he was Superman. Now, ultimately his villainous nature was revealed, and all that really just goes into the fact that DC was trying to find a way to bring Superman back, but they just didn't really know how. And in fact, they ended up bringing the original Superman back in one of the dumbest ways ever. But what matters here is that you basically end up having Cyborg going after Jonathan, and Jonathan's not overly prepared for Cyborg Superman, because Hank Henshaw has faced off against Jonathan's father multiple times. He's faced off against the Green Lanterns. The guy's been around the block more than a few times. And while Jonathan is able to hold his own, the reality here is that Cyborg is relentless. I mean, this guy is just brutal on a whole different level. And what it requires is Jonathan to lower himself to Cyborg's level. And that's the reality of the situation, right? Like, it's one of the things to know. And facing off against any conflict, the only way to really win is to become as bad as the person you're fighting, or potentially even worse, in order to overcome them. Now, again, I know that leads into the slippery slope argument, right? People make that argument when they don't have any other argument to make, but all you have to do is just go back to being a good guy, right? It's just the way things work, because there are some enemies out there that are so extreme that the only way to overcome them is to do something like that, right? Like, is to become exceedingly brutal. And that's what Jonathan does, right? He literally just takes it to Cyborg and starts pummeling him as best he can. Now, he does manage to get the upper hand, and he does manage to take out Cyborg Superman, which of course leads to the arrival of the actual Cyborg himself, of course allying himself with Jonathan Kent and so on, which is cool, because now they'll have a person who can be the security guard for whatever their new base of operations is, because Cyborg never does anything useful in DC Comics. But the thing about this is that you also have Slade Wilson, right? You've got Deathstroke, who intends to still kill Nightwing, and that's when Pariah chimes in, and that's when we find out what's actually going on here. So the reality is, Deathstroke making his move and taking out the different superheroes, it's not really designed for the purpose of killing them. I mean, Deathstroke does want to take out Nightwing, right? He does want to eliminate this guy, but Pariah's instructions are clear, right? Remember your mission, sow chaos, create a crisis, bring my dark army to you, bring the heroes to me. Like, that's the point, that's what Pariah wants. Again, Pariah's rounding up superheroes for his own goal, right? For his own purpose. Again, we'll find out what that is as we get further into the story. But what you basically end up having is Deathstroke literally telling Nightwing, consider this a mercy thing, right? Like, things are only ever going to get worse from here. You've momentarily defeated me, but consider this. The Justice League is off the board, right? The Justice League is out of the picture now. Your entire superhero community is scattered, leaderless, and divided. Nobody is taking up the charge. Jonathan Kent's trying, but he can barely hold it together because he's too inexperienced. Every single villain out there in the world is going to be coming for you, and for every superhero across the world. And so what ends up happening is that in the aftermath of all of this, Black Adam arrives. Now, Black Adam has been monitoring this entire situation. Remember, he's the only one that survived the deaths of the Justice League, or at least the perceived deaths of the Justice League. And when he came back, people didn't readily believe his story, that Pariah had attacked everybody and everything had popped off and so on and so forth. But the reality is he was telling the truth. It's just his shady history that leads people to kind of looking at him with a bit of a skewed eye. And so once he arrives here, he's just kind of like, I was right? Like, Jonathan Kent, you are not ready to lead the Justice League. You're too inexperienced, and in reality, you're just too nice, right? But he says, Nightwing, I was wrong about you, right? Like, all this chaos, this madness, the blame for this falls at your feet, because you should have known better. You've been around the block multiple times. You fought alongside Batman multiple times. You know pretty much everything Bruce Wayne does. You are, in almost every way, him. You should have known exactly how to handle the situation, but you didn't. And so ultimately, Jonathan's kind of like, well, then where were you, Black Adam? Like, where were you during all of this, right? Just kind of sitting on your mighty throne and judging and so on and so forth, right? Like, if you're so great, why don't you lead the Justice League? And the response of Black Adam is, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because the reality here, Jonathan, is that you as superheroes, and even Nightwing and these guys, you're great superheroes in the best of times. When things are going great and the stakes aren't astronomically high and you don't have to do really, really bad things, you're a great Justice League. You're good because you can maintain your goodness while also fighting the good fight. But when it hits the fan, when reality sets in and you're gonna have to start doing things that you don't feel like you're ready to do, you guys aren't the ones to lead the team. I am, because I will do whatever it takes to win. I will do whatever it takes to come out on top. I will beg, borrow, steal, and kill, because I'm Black Adam, and that's what I do. And so his response is, I will lead this Justice League. I will take over this team, and I will turn you into the protectors that this Earth should have always had, and that this Earth needs. And so what we end up doing here is transitioning out in space, right? Literally just this frigate orbiting this world. And you've got this guy in this orange jumpsuit who's literally just running around and taking out these various guards. Ultimately, he blows open a door and literally heads for like some kind of a vessel that can get him out there. But suddenly, two people appear out of nowhere. Hal Jordan and Joe Mullion, which is technically Sojourner Mullion, but they just simply call her Joe because it's probably just easier to pronounce, which makes good sense. Two Green Lanterns. Now, here's the thing about this, right? This guy is Kyle Rayner, and the question you're probably asking yourself is, why is Kyle Rayner running around with a gun? Where's his Green Lantern ring? Okay, so this happened in the newest Green Lantern run, which we should probably cover, to be honest, because it's a really, really good run. I don't know if it's finished yet, but in effect, what had happened is the entire Green Lantern central power battery was basically destroyed, and there aren't really any Green Lanterns left anymore. Hal Jordan and Joe and maybe a few others exist, but a majority of the Green Lantern group is gone. But they end up presenting Kyle Rayner with a Green Lantern ring. The issue here that Kyle Rayner has is he's just like, okay, so if what you're telling me is true, right? Because Hal Jordan tells him about like the Great Darkness and all that kind of stuff. You know, Kyle Rayner's just kind of like, if what you're telling me is true, we're gonna need more than just 3 Green Lanterns. And that's when we end up finding out that what had happened here is that there had basically been an instance where the Green Lantern has effectively reformed, or at least the Green Lantern Corps has essentially reformed, not nearly as big as it was before. You've got maybe 30 Green Lanterns here, right? So you've basically got a very small number, one of which includes Guy Gardner, who was another Green Lantern that vanished with the destruction of the Green Lantern Central Power Battery, and we didn't necessarily know where he had come from. But the other part of this, and one of the cool things that's important here, is that when it came to Joe becoming a Green Lantern, she was actually presented with a Green Lantern ring by one of the Guardians of the Universe and basically given the task 1 year to make a difference. Now, her story came out of DC Comics, basically doing exactly what Marvel Comics did in All New, All Different Marvel, where they were writing like highly political stories. So as you guys can imagine, right, like there was vitriol on both sides. There were people who were pissed off about it, people who loved it, that kind of a thing. It was just DC Comics sowing controversy for the purpose of getting people to pay attention to their stories. But the reality here is that it's effectively the Green Lanterns joining into the conflict. So if you guys are interested in me covering that Green Lantern story, let me know, because honestly, we still need to finish Jeff Johns' run. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.